welcome to my channel, Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The cold wind cut through the narrow alley, whistling like a living thing as he stepped cautiously forward, senses heightened, every nerve alert. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering with the faint glow of a distant neon sign, casting jagged shapes that seemed to move on their own. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, a warning written in every echo of his footsteps. Ahead, a figure stood still, almost statuesque, a blade glinting faintly in the dim light, the metal reflecting the fragmented neon glow like liquid silver. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, followed his every movement, unblinking, cold, unyielding. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the broken pipes overhead. He stopped a few feet away, muscles tensed, every instinct screaming that one wrong move could be fatal. She tilted her head slightly, the blade raised with deliberate calm, and asked with a voice like ice, "Any last words?" He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the invisible countdown that measured life against death. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, the world narrowing to the tip of that blade, the potential for catastrophe so immediate it made his stomach churn. The wind tugged at his coat, flapping it against his legs, and he felt the adrenaline surge, not panic, but sharp, focused clarity. Then, with a faint smile that betrayed both courage and a hint of mischief, he spoke, "Yeah, you're holding it wrong." For a fraction of a second, time seemed to pause, the words hanging in the cold air like a challenge, daring the universe itself to respond. Her eyes widened, just slightly, a flicker of disbelief crossing the otherwise impassive mask. The blade wavered, not from fear but from curiosity, and the tension shifted imperceptibly. He moved with the precision of someone who had faced danger before, stepping lightly, every movement calculated yet fluid, confident without arrogance. The night seemed to lean in closer, the shadows bending toward the confrontation, silent witnesses to the exchange. "You think that's clever?" she asked, voice low, laced with intrigue rather than menace now. Her stance remained controlled, ready, but the edge of her dominance had cracked just enough to reveal the subtle shift in power. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, eyes locking onto hers, reading the micro-expressions that betrayed thought and hesitation. "Clever," he said finally, voice calm, almost teasing, "No, just accurate. Your grip, it's off. You're exposing the angle." Her fingers tightened on the hilt, the tension in her arms and shoulders betraying her training. She had expected fear, submission, but not this. Not someone dissecting her stance mid-confrontation, not someone so unflinchingly present at the edge of danger. The alley seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move, the next word. He took a measured step closer, but not threatening, more analytical, as if inspecting a problem that demanded a solution. His voice carried softly, deliberately, layering confidence over the stillness. "If you shift your wrist slightly, you'll have leverage, but you'll also open yourself to counter. It's basic mechanics, really. You're skilled, but predictable." Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, caught between irritation and amusement. She adjusted the blade slightly, testing the correction, and his eyes tracked every minute change, noting the weight distribution, the flex in her stance, the subtle shifts that spoke volumes. The night held them suspended in a tense ballet, a silent narrative of dominance and wit, the kind that only emerges when danger is immediate and intellect meets instinct. The dripping water, the hum of distant traffic, the faint neon flicker, they were all background to this singular moment of collision between force and cleverness. "You analyze everything, don't you?" she said finally, the edge returning to her voice, but the curiosity was undeniable. She tested him again, a small feint with the blade, precise and swift. He reacted instinctively, sidestepping, moving with grace, the smile never leaving his face. "Not everything," he replied, voice steady, "only what matters. Life, survival, opportunity. The rest is noise." The space between them contracted, a few steps closing the gap, and yet neither struck. The dance continued, a silent understanding forming that strength alone would not determine the outcome. Her movements became a little less rigid, his confidence a little more pronounced. The alley, which had seemed like a cage moments ago, now felt like a stage, the two performers locked in a subtle war of mind, muscle, and nerve. "You're unusual," she admitted, the blade lowering fractionally, curiosity outweighing threat. He nodded, eyes never leaving hers. "Unusual keeps you alive," he said simply, almost philosophically. "Predictable ends things fast. You know that." A gust of wind shifted the mist and debris at their feet, scattering small papers and dust, breaking the tension momentarily, a reminder that the world outside still existed, even if only peripherally. He used the moment to observe her fully, not with fear, but with keen calculation, noting the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle movements in her stance, the telltale signs of experience and discipline. It was a rare confrontation, one that didn't demand brute strength alone but demanded presence, awareness, and clever timing. "You're alive because you're clever," she said, almost as if speaking to herself as much as him. He allowed himself a small laugh, a sound soft but confident, reverberating lightly in the narrow alley. "Clever? Maybe. Or maybe I just know when not to play the obvious game." He tilted his head again, a gesture that was casual but deliberate, signaling a readiness that went beyond fear or humor. Life's rarely about brute force alone. Observation counts more. Always counts more. Her grip shifted again, a minor adjustment, and he noticed immediately, nodding slightly. He was calm, poised, not intimidated, not overconfident, balanced perfectly in the knife-edge moment between peril and safety. Every micro-expression, every subtle twitch, told him what he needed to know. Her mind was racing, calculating angles, outcomes, probability, yet she hadn't predicted his simplicity in response, a smile, a sentence, a truth that cut deeper than the blade she wielded. For a moment, the world outside the alley disappeared. Time seemed elastic, stretching each heartbeat into an eternity. The neon glow, the dripping water, the distant hum of life, they all receded into insignificance. All that remained was the interaction, the tension, the silent acknowledgement that intellect and courage could tip the scales even in the direst circumstances. The alley had become a crucible, forging a singular narrative of survival, wit, and nerve. He leaned slightly forward, not in threat, but in focus, eyes fixed on hers. "It's not just about holding the blade correctly," he said quietly, voice steady and controlled. "It's about understanding what it represents, the commitment behind the motion, and knowing when to react without hesitation. You've trained, yes, but technique without thought, it's meaningless." Her breathing was steady, but her eyes betrayed the mental calculus unfolding. He had disrupted expectation, broken the usual flow of confrontation, and injected uncertainty into a moment that could have been fatal. That tiny shift in balance, that slight pause, was everything. Every seasoned warrior, every street-smart survivor knew that once doubt crept in, opportunity opened. He had done exactly that. The alley seemed to listen, the walls amplifying the subtle drama of this encounter. He could feel the tension pulse like a living thing, responding to every nuance, every shift in posture, every measured word. "You adapt quickly," she said finally, almost reluctantly. He nodded, letting the acknowledgement hang, unembellished, simple. "Quick enough to stay alive. Always quick enough to stay alive." A shadow passed overhead, momentarily obscuring the neon glow, and the night held its breath again. He adjusted his stance slightly, shifting weight, preparing for the next move, not with fear, but with deliberate anticipation. Her blade wavered, a microsecond of hesitation, and he recognized it immediately, the imperceptible crack that could be exploited without aggression, a dance of observation and intellect, a silent chess match at the edge of life. The first section ends here, leaving the tension unresolved, the confrontation alive and teetering, setting the stage for deeper engagement, the unfolding of wit, courage, and the unexpected turn that will define the next moment in their dangerous encounter. The moment stretched, heavy and electric, as he studied her stance, the faint gleam of the blade tracing her deliberate, calculated movements. His mind raced not with fear, but with strategy, analyzing angles, momentum, and probability with the clarity of someone who had faced danger countless times before. The shadows shifted slightly as a passing vehicle's headlights flickered across the alley, painting both of them in alternating flashes of light and darkness. She mirrored the light's rhythm, adjusting her grip, her eyes narrowing with precision, and he smiled faintly, recognizing the rhythm of someone who relied on training, discipline, and brute instinct. He had expected control, predictability, a straightforward dance of attack and defense, but what he faced now was more complex. A mind that thought 2 steps ahead, yet one that could be unsettled by wit and subtle misdirection. "Clever words," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with the smallest hint of curiosity. "But will they save you?" Her blade moved again, a measured test, slicing the air with deadly intent, forcing him to react with microsecond precision. He stepped aside, fluid and calm, letting her momentum pass harmlessly. "Words alone?" he asked lightly, letting the air carry the echo. "No. But awareness, observation, and timing? Those might." Each word was carefully chosen, not to provoke but to create uncertainty, planting the seed of hesitation in her mind. She paused mid-motion, the blade hovering, a fraction of a second longer than instinct would dictate, and he noticed the subtle twitch of her fingers, the micro-adjustment in her wrist. In that instant, the alley became a chessboard, their bodies pieces moving in silent calculation. He could feel the weight of possibility pressing from all directions, yet he remained composed, letting the tension draw her in. "You rely on power," he said quietly, almost conversationally, "but power without foresight is blind. And blind can be surprising." Her eyes flicked upward for just a heartbeat, scanning the narrow escape routes, the debris, the confined walls that limited movement. He mirrored her glance subtly, noting every detail she noticed, preparing for every contingency she might anticipate. This wasn't about defeating her with brute force, it was about survival, about presence, about reading the situation with a calm mind while under extreme pressure. The cool night air, the faint hum of distant traffic, the dripping water, all became background to this high-stakes mental duel, an invisible pressure that measured nerve, skill, and cunning. He shifted slightly, just enough to test her reflexes, drawing a minor feint from her. The blade moved with precision, slicing air in a calculated arc, but he anticipated it, pivoting just enough to remain out of reach. His lips curved in a faint smirk as he noted the subtle strain in her shoulders, the microsecond delay that revealed focus and calculation rather than pure instinct. "You're fast," he said, voice steady, carrying no fear, only recognition. "But speed without insight can be hazardous." The alley seemed to lean inward, the darkness pressing closer, shadows folding over them like a shroud. She didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to measure him, to assess whether this was bluff, skill, or something more dangerous, a combination of both. He could see her mind calculating angles, evaluating probability, and he smiled faintly, sensing that he had already begun to influence her decisions, subtly reshaping the fight without striking a single blow. "You play games," she finally said, the blade lowering fractionally, though still ready, still lethal. "This isn't a game." Her tone held both warning and intrigue, a paradox that only heightened the tension. He shook his head slightly, letting a faint laugh escape, light and almost teasing. "Not a game," he corrected, "but life sometimes feels like one. Timing, choices, awareness, that's the only way to survive. And right now, it's survival that counts." Her eyes narrowed, studying him as if trying to unearth the underlying strategy, the hidden intentions, the logic behind his calm demeanor. He didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that presence of mind often outweighed physical skill, that composure could turn a deadly moment into a manageable one. Every micro-expression, every subtle motion, every whispered thought in her stance told him more than any words ever could. A gust of wind swept through the alley, rattling the loose debris and carrying the faint scent of rain from the distant street. It distracted neither of them, both had eyes and ears trained for the smallest shift in circumstance. He adjusted his stance slightly, leaning into the wind without surrendering balance, ready for the next move, ready for any sudden aggression. She responded, mirroring his subtle adjustment, but the fractional delay was enough to give him a mental edge. He recognized it immediately, cataloging the probability of each potential strike, each feint, each defensive maneuver. "You're unusual," she admitted again, the words quieter this time, not a challenge but an observation. He allowed the compliment to hang, unembellished, simple. "Unusual keeps you alive," he said, voice calm, carrying both seriousness and subtle humor. "Predictable ends things too quickly." His eyes never left hers, observing, calculating, adjusting, like a predator measuring risk while remaining within the bounds of civility. Her grip shifted imperceptibly, a subtle recalibration, and he recognized the intent behind it. "You adapt quickly," she murmured, almost reluctantly, the tension in her voice softening just a fraction. He smiled faintly, acknowledging the rare compliment. "Quick enough to stay alive," he replied, voice low, steady, controlled. "Always quick enough." The alley held its silence, the walls amplifying the subtle symphony of tension, strategy, and mental chess between them. He could feel it pulsing in the very air, a living force that reacted to every movement, every decision, every carefully chosen word. Time stretched and contracted unpredictably, the seconds elongating as each measured breath, each precise step, became a battleground of intellect and nerve. A faint reflection caught his eye, the blade's tip brushing against a loose pipe overhead. He adjusted his weight, shifting slightly without moving his feet, testing her observation. She responded, anticipating a feint, but he hadn't moved aggressively, and she realized instantly that her calculation had been subtly manipulated. Her eyes widened fractionally, a silent acknowledgement of his clever manipulation. "You're not afraid," she said finally, voice deliberate, almost incredulous. "Not a trace of fear." He shrugged lightly, allowing a subtle chuckle to escape. "Fear is a tool," he said. "Recognize it, control it, use it. But never let it control you." Each word resonated with precision, a lesson embedded in calm delivery, a reflection of experience and survival instinct. Another gust of wind rattled the alley, scattering debris in a chaotic pattern, but neither flinched. Their dance continued, subtle, calculated, an unspoken dialogue of movement and thought. He moved with minimal motion, adjusting balance, observing micro-expressions, calculating trajectories. She followed suit, her instincts sharpened but her mind now sharing space with doubt, curiosity, and subtle recognition of his unusual presence. "Observation," he said quietly, "is often more lethal than brute strength. Knowledge and timing define the outcome more than skill alone. You've trained, yes, but instinct without insight, it only carries you so far." Her eyes flickered at his words, measuring truth, weighing logic against experience, analyzing the hidden strategy behind his calm demeanor. The tension in the alley reached a palpable peak, a moment where silence spoke louder than any blade could. Every droplet of water, every shifting shadow, every faint hum of distant life became secondary to the silent war of wit, nerve, and intellect unfolding before the world. She adjusted again, subtly, a fraction of a degree, a tiny mental shift influenced by his presence, his observation, his clever manipulation of perception. He noted each adjustment, cataloging and predicting, the calm smile on his face unshaken. The first strikes were unnecessary. He understood that the mind often dictated the motion of the hand, the reflex of the body, the choice to attack or defend. By maintaining composure, he had already tilted the scale slightly in his favor. The night seemed to lean closer, listening, watching, an invisible witness to a confrontation that transcended simple violence. Every breath, every blink, every subtle move told a story of survival, courage, and mental acuity. He held his ground, letting tension build, letting uncertainty seat itself in her awareness, knowing that in a battle of wits and reflex, perception often determined the outcome long before action did. Her lips parted slightly, hesitating as she considered her next move. He remained poised, calm, and observant, aware of every microsecond, every thought reflected in her expression, every intention that could be gleaned from posture and breath. The alley had become more than a physical space, it was a stage, a crucible, a living arena of intelligence, nerve, and precision. The alley seemed to contract, the darkness pressing closer as the game intensified. Every step, every micro-movement carried weight. He could feel the pressure not only from her poised blade but from the very atmosphere surrounding them, as if the night itself were a participant in their duel of wits and reflexes. The faint flicker of neon reflected off the wet asphalt, casting erratic shadows that danced across their faces. Her eyes never left his, sharp and analytical, searching for weakness, searching for the flicker of fear that might betray him. He smiled faintly, knowing that control was not in the blade alone but in understanding, anticipation, and subtle manipulation of perception. "You're still standing," she said, voice a mixture of irritation and admiration. Most would have faltered by now. He shrugged lightly, the hint of a grin tugging at his lips. "Standing is habitual," he replied. "Surviving is intentional. The difference is in noticing what others overlook." She shifted her stance, testing again, moving the blade in a calculated arc that could have ended the confrontation instantly if he misstepped. He responded with fluid precision, pivoting and sidestepping, letting her motion carry her momentum past him harmlessly. "Precision alone isn't enough," he said, calm and deliberate. "It's timing, awareness, and choosing the right moment that counts." Her eyes flickered with curiosity, perhaps even a spark of respect, though she would never admit it openly. The tension remained, thick as fog, but now tinged with a subtle psychological war. Each movement, each word, was part of a larger strategy. He studied the micro-expressions on her face, the twitch of a muscle, the slight imbalance in weight, the faint hesitation in her breathing. These were all pieces of the puzzle, small cracks in the veneer of control, and he planned to exploit them not with aggression but with intellect. "You analyze everything," she said finally, lowering the blade fractionally. "Even this encounter." His smile widened just slightly. "Analysis is survival," he replied. "Without it, skill alone is insufficient." The moment stretched, a delicate pause where thought measured instinct, and instinct measured courage. He stepped slightly closer, not threatening, but precise, like a predator evaluating opportunity without rushing. She adjusted, mirroring his motion, yet the microsecond difference in timing gave him a subtle edge, a crack in the armor of expectation. A sudden gust of wind rattled the loose debris in the alley, scattering papers and small fragments of metal. Neither flinched, both were attuned to the environment, their senses heightened to imperceptible changes. He noted the shift in her stance, a fraction of a degree, enough to alter the effectiveness of her strike if she chose to act. "You're quick," she admitted, tone softer, restrained, as if conceding a minor victory. "But insight matters more than reflex." He nodded subtly, acknowledging the rare compliment. "Insight always matters," he said. "Speed without thought is just wasted energy." The alley seemed alive with tension, shadows stretching, bending, folding over them, silent witnesses to the duel unfolding. Each breath, each step, each blink was part of a rhythm, a calculated dance of awareness and nerve. He allowed himself to lean slightly, testing her reaction, planting the seed of uncertainty. She responded, slicing through the air with a small feint, sharp and precise, but he had anticipated it. He pivoted almost imperceptibly, letting her momentum pass by, and for a brief instant, the balance shifted. "You manipulate the moment without touching it," she said, voice barely above a whisper, recognition threading through her words. He tilted his head slightly, a soft chuckle escaping. "Moments are like clay," he said. "You mold them carefully, subtly. Often, it's not about force, it's about direction, leverage, and patience." Her lips twitched in a restrained smile, the acknowledgement of his unusual skill flashing across her face. She adjusted her stance again, microseconds behind his thought, her mind racing to compensate for the subtle manipulations he introduced. Time itself seemed elastic, stretching each heartbeat, bending each second to the will of calculation. He studied her movements as a maestro studies a symphony, noting rhythm, pauses, inflections, and inconsistencies. Every feint she made, every adjustment, every twitch of the fingers on the hilt contributed to a pattern he deciphered and exploited. Survival was not random, it was awareness applied with relentless attention, a mental map overlaid on instinctive reflex. "You're not afraid," she said, voice laced with both curiosity and incredulity. "Not even slightly?" He shook his head calmly. "Fear is awareness," he said. "Controlled, understood, and used. It's the recognition of danger, not surrender to it." He stepped closer still, letting the subtle increase in proximity create tension without threat. The air seemed to hum with the silent dialogue of their movements, a conversation without words, where mind measured mind, nerve met nerve, and reflex followed intuition. Her blade moved again, a carefully calculated slice that could have ended the encounter if misjudged. He pivoted, sidestepped, adjusted his stance, and responded with minimal movement, conserving energy while maintaining advantage. Technique without thought is useless, he said softly, almost philosophically. Awareness turns motion into strategy. She paused, reassessing, the glimmer of uncertainty just visible in her eyes, as though his words had shaken her confidence in a subtle, unspoken way. A faint reflection caught his eye, the blade's edge glinting off a puddle. He shifted, adjusting weight without overt motion, and she instinctively mirrored, but a microsecond delay revealed her thought process. He smiled faintly. See? Even the smallest hesitation counts. Her lips pressed together, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power, subtle and invisible to anyone but the observant. The tension escalated, not through aggression, but through anticipation and controlled interaction. He noticed the rhythm of her breathing, slight changes in balance, tiny shifts in muscle tension. Every element was data, and he processed it instantly, preparing for options that hadn't yet been revealed. She tested again, a feint combined with a slight forward motion, and he responded with calm fluidity, maintaining composure while subtly guiding the encounter. "You're unusual," she said, a note of admiration threading through her words. He allowed the acknowledgement to remain unspoken, a small nod to the rare compliment. "Unusual keeps you alive," he said quietly. "Predictability kills quickly." The night seemed to close in, enclosing them in a chamber of intellect, courage, and anticipation. Shadows shifted like living beings, listening, observing, responding to each subtle motion, each deliberate breath. A sudden gust swept through, rattling debris and papers, breaking the monotony of the night's stillness. Neither reacted overtly, both were attuned, reading opportunity in every change. He adjusted slightly, her eyes following, the subtle microsecond delay signaling recognition of his intent. "You observe," she said softly. "More than I expected." He smiled faintly. "Observation is survival," he replied. "Speed and skill are secondary to awareness, insight, and timing." The alley held its tension, suspended between action and anticipation. He stepped lightly, testing her reaction without aggression, creating subtle mental pressure. She responded, shifting stance, testing him with calculated feints, yet he had already predicted the rhythm, the intent, the direction. Every motion she made was data, every pause an opportunity to influence the outcome without violence. "You play the mind as much as the body," she said finally, her voice carrying a rare respect. He tilted his head slightly, a faint grin on his lips. The mind often dictates the body's response long before it acts. Awareness, presence, calculation, these are the real tools of survival. The neon light flickered, casting alternating shadows across their faces, emphasizing the tension, the high-stakes psychological duel that transcended mere confrontation. A drop of water fell from a broken pipe above, splashing onto the wet pavement, and the sound seemed amplified in the alley. He allowed a subtle pause, letting her perceive potential movement without acting, maintaining the suspense, feeding uncertainty into her awareness. She reacted instinctively, mirroring, adjusting, calculating, but now, her analysis was influenced by his calm, confident presence. The moment stretched, time slowing as awareness and intellect became weapons in themselves. He studied her micro-expressions, each minute shift in balance, each flicker of thought, each subtle breath. Every feint she attempted, every testing motion, he observed without aggression, maintaining dominance through anticipation and insight. "You've changed the rules of engagement," she said finally, the statement both accusation and acknowledgement. He smiled faintly, voice calm and steady. "The rules are always changing. One only adapts or falls behind. Tonight, we see who adapts faster." The alley seemed to pulse with tension, alive, silent, and observing as the dance continued, the climax inching closer with each passing heartbeat. The alley held its breath, shadows stretching longer as the confrontation reached its peak. Every heartbeat was amplified, every step, every subtle twitch carrying significance. The air itself seemed dense, thick with anticipation, a silent witness to the psychological duel that had been building since their first encounter. He could feel the rhythm of her movements, the calculated shifts, the tiny adjustments that revealed both skill and curiosity. Each micro-expression, each fraction of a second hesitation, was data, a map of intent and possibility he read instinctively. "You've tested me enough," she said, voice steady but tinged with curiosity and restrained acknowledgement. Her grip on the blade remained firm, yet the subtle shifts betrayed a mind working through the implications of his calm and calculated presence. He smiled faintly, eyes locked on hers, aware that the next moment would define the outcome not through strength, but through awareness, nerve, and wit. Testing is observation, he replied softly. Observation is survival. And survival isn't about attacking first, it's about understanding everything before making a move. The faint hum of distant traffic, the dripping water, the scattered debris on the wet pavement, they all became background to this final act, a stage set for the ultimate confrontation of intellect and nerve. She lunged forward suddenly, a precise strike meant to test reflex, to force an opening. He pivoted, letting her momentum carry past him harmlessly, a controlled motion, almost graceful, the kind born of practiced skill and sharp awareness. The faintest smile touched his lips as he noted her slight overextension, a microsecond miscalculation, a crack in the armor of precision. "You anticipate too much," she said, voice tighter now, a mixture of tension and reluctant admiration. He nodded subtly. "Anticipation is what separates survival from failure," he said. "Predictability is fatal. Awareness is everything." The neon light flickered across her blade, reflecting off the wet asphalt, and in that reflection, he saw her mind working through every possibility, every contingency, every potential outcome. He stepped lightly, almost imperceptibly, into the perfect position to maintain control without aggression. A gust of wind rattled the alley, carrying papers and dust into the air. She adjusted, trying to regain balance, and he noted the subtle hesitation, the fraction of a second where uncertainty crept in. "You've shifted the balance," she admitted, her voice lower now, almost introspective. Without striking. He allowed the acknowledgement to remain, a silent nod to the effectiveness of strategy over brute force. "Force alone rarely wins," he said calmly. "Subtlety, observation, and timing often decide the outcome before action even begins." Their eyes locked, each studying the other, calculating the next move, predicting reactions, weighing probabilities. The tension in the alley was electric, palpable, a living thing. He noticed her breathing, slightly uneven now, betraying concentration and the rare recognition that she was facing an opponent unlike any she had encountered. The dance had shifted from physical confrontation to mental chess, each move and countermove carefully considered, each breath a calculation. "Why are you so calm?" she asked finally, voice low and deliberate. "Even now?" He tilted his head slightly, a soft chuckle escaping. "Calm comes from understanding," he said. "Understanding comes from observation. Once you see every possibility and account for each, fear loses its power. Composure becomes a weapon." The subtle smile on his face was both reassurance and challenge, an acknowledgement that the outcome hinged not on the blade, but on nerve, wit, and perception. She lunged again, faster this time, a direct strike intended to force reaction. He stepped aside with minimal motion, letting her momentum carry her past, and in that instant, subtly adjusted her trajectory with a gentle shift of his weight. The blade traced an arc harmlessly, and he maintained perfect poise, eyes fixed on hers, reading every twitch, every breath, every calculation in her expression. The alley seemed to shrink around them, time stretching as awareness, anticipation, and strategy converged. "You manipulate everything," she whispered, a note of awe threading her words. He nodded slightly. "Not everything," he corrected softly. "Only what matters." Each word was deliberate, carrying weight without aggression, a testament to his mastery of mental engagement over physical dominance. She adjusted again, subtly, recognizing the influence he exerted without movement, without force. The game was no longer about attack or defense, it was about dominance of perception, control of awareness, and the precise orchestration of tension. The neon glow flickered, casting brief shadows that danced across the walls. The dripping water echoed, a subtle percussion accompanying the climax. He shifted, leaning slightly forward, the faintest smile tugging at his lips, eyes locked on hers, reading intent, anticipating motion. She mirrored his movement, a fraction of a second behind, and he noted the subtle hesitation, the critical gap between calculation and execution. "Enough," she said finally, lowering the blade just slightly, a silent concession. He held his position, eyes calm, steady, unblinking. "Enough," he echoed softly. "Enough to see the truth, that awareness, composure, and timing decide the outcome more than force ever could." The faintest acknowledgement passed between them, a mutual understanding forged in the crucible of tension, intellect, and nerve. He took a deliberate step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, but precise, measured. The balance had shifted subtly, not through attack, but through mastery of perception and anticipation. "You've adapted," she said quietly, almost reverently. "And that makes you formidable." He allowed the compliment to pass without comment, a simple nod signaling recognition. "Formidable," he replied softly. "Only when necessity requires it." The wind swept through the alley one last time, scattering loose debris, rustling papers, and carrying the faint scent of rain. She lowered the blade fully, a subtle exhale escaping her lips. The moment of confrontation had passed, not through violence, but through intellect, observation, and nerve. The tension remained, but transformed into mutual respect, an acknowledgement of the subtle psychological duel that had unfolded in the shadows of the alley. "You survived," she said finally, voice calm but carrying the weight of understanding. He smiled faintly, gaze steady. "Survival is a combination of observation, composure, and understanding. Brute force is rarely enough." The neon flickered, the shadows softened, and the alley, once a stage of danger and tension, now felt like a quiet witness to the resolution of a high-stakes encounter. They stood there, silent, breathing in the night, each aware of the unspoken acknowledgement that passed between them. The game had ended, not in defeat or victory, but in recognition that the mind, composure, and awareness often outweighed raw skill. He took a step back, allowing space, signaling closure without aggression. She, in turn, lowered the blade completely, eyes lingering on him, a trace of admiration in her gaze. The final echoes of the night, the dripping water, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of debris, carried the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. He turned slightly, preparing to leave the alley, aware that the tension had dissipated, replaced by a mutual understanding that survival and skill were measured as much by intellect as by reflex. She watched him go, the blade now at rest, acknowledging silently that the encounter had been resolved through mind over motion, wit over force, presence over fear. As he disappeared into the shadows, the memory of the smile, the calm, and the calculated composure lingered. The story of the alley, the blade, and the unspoken duel would remain, a testament to the power of observation, nerve, and strategic thought in moments where life itself hung in the balance.